remember back about 14 years ago when I started to attend Grace Church and went out on a retreat with the Joint-Heirs. And it was during that time I felt a real need in my life to get involved in a ministry and put to practice some of the things that the Lord had been teaching me. I met a fellow up at camp by the name of Mike McGill, who introduced me to the tape ministry, and I told him that I would like to, get involved. So after talking with him and we came back from that weekend away, I started working with a fellow there in the ministry by the name of Larry Tyler. And he and I worked together then on a volunteer basis for the first year of the ministry. And during that first year I worked 3 or 4 nights a week just doing whatever needed to be done to get the word out. And from that point on, the ministry had grown so that at that point they needed somebody to come on in a full-time capacity. And so the Lord opened the door and allowed me the opportunity to be a part of that ministry.
Many people wonder how the ministry got started. It was started with a tape ministry known as Word of Grace. The tape ministry was started by one person, just going reel to reel and tape to tape, and eventually cassette to cassette, one at a time. And it started back in 1971. In that period of time, from 1971 to 1978, the tape ministry grew from 100 in a month to over 1,000 a month. And in 1977, they had almost 100,000 cassettes at the end of the year.
And for the next 5 to 6 years, I spent working through all phases of the tape ministry. And at the end of that point, we branched off into radio, and that's when I got introduced to Norm Spear, who felt a tremendous need of getting the messages from John's sermon on the air.
In 1977, they were approached by a radio station approached John MacArthur and asked him if they could be willing to go on their station, a station locally here in the San Fernando Valley, taking the tapes and playing them for 1 hour. Well, they decided they'd try it. And as a result, for 13 weeks, they contracted to play John MacArthur's 1-hour messages 5 days a week following the races. And the result from that was disastrous. And I went to the board and I said, look, I know that we had a failure in a sense, just didn't go on the 13-week program, but I feel that it would really work on a 5-day-a-week, half-hour basis. And I'd like to volunteer my time to do it. Well, reluctantly, the board finally agreed to let us try it for 1 year. And they were gracious enough to give us $25,000 towards putting together this program. So with 3 people, Rick Dre, who is the production man that put it all together, and Dana Way, at that time a part-time secretary, and myself, began to put this program together. We went on the air on a 30-minute basis in January 30th, 1978. By the end of that year, we went from 1 station to 12 stations. In 1979, we went up to 24 stations. We started our ministry in a small room in back of the 230 room. In 1979, the latter part of 79, we moved up to the old tape room, which is now known as the outreach department. And then from there, we moved to Satakoy. We felt it was very important that John be part of the program outside of just using his tapes. And to do this, we would tape John in his office. And that's where I'm sitting right now, in his office at the church. And we would spend an hour taping these these openings for 2 weeks at a time. And so for 2 years, John never really got excited about this ministry. Because, you see, we weren't on radio here locally during that time, and so no one had a chance to really hear the program. It wasn't until John took a sabbatical with his family and spent several months going across the country speaking at various places and camps. And he had the opportunity to speak in a church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that was the turning point of his life. At the end of the time he spoke there, a great big 6'6", 280-pound hog farmer came up to him after he spoke with tears in his eyes, put his arms around John, literally lifted him off the ground and said to him, "Don't you ever go off the air." Well, when John and his wife came back from that trip, they were very, very excited because they realized for the first time that people were really excited about his ministry, that it was reaching into areas that has never been reached before. And from that day to this, John has always been very excited about the ministry.
My introduction to Grace to You came shortly after it went on the air. Darlene and I were newlyweds and we moved to Tampa, Florida. And interestingly, Tampa was one of the first 3 stations nationwide that Grace to You went on the air back in 1978. And I had a friend there who was a John MacArthur aficionado, and he suggested that I begin to listen to Grace to You on the radio. He said, it's on every morning at 9 o'clock. And so I tuned in, and it was good. And I got addicted, and I listened daily, every day. And John MacArthur was my teacher for the 3 years that we lived in Florida through Grace to You. So I think I was one of the earliest people on the mailing list.
When I started back in, well, it was actually 1979, February, we were still working at the church upstairs, and I think we were just going on computers, so everything was really just testing everything. And we did a lot of handwork, and it was a lot smaller, and even then it seemed like it just was growing in leaps and bounds, and it was, well, things were changing all the time. Opportunities, the Lord was just really blessing the ministry, and we just kept growing and growing, and pretty soon then we moved down to the building where radio was by themselves before we merged with Word of Grace.
Many, many of our people came first as a volunteer because they wanted to fill a need, and that need was to get materials and tapes and books into the hands of people across the country who are listening to Grace to You on the radio. Several of the people I'd like to mention, one in particular is Doug Such, who came, and his wife Imogene, who came here from Ohio strictly as volunteers. And working almost a year as volunteers, were asked to join Word of Grace Communications, and they eventually headed up the tape aspect of Word of Grace Communications.
And I was offered a job here as part-time, and I went into the editing department and worked there for 3 months, and then asked to come into the volunteers to help organize them with the help of Dave Lummis. And they asked me to come in to help the volunteers because I had volunteered for so long and I knew a lot of people, and a way to how to handle, I guess. People thought I could handle people real well. And I think because working with a lot of people, I had a lot of patience. For some reason, I did have a lot of patience, and I was able to help people. I guess it's because that was my forte.
I started in October as a volunteer in 1979, and I was not a Christian, and I had gone to church to hear John because I had promised my daughter-in-law that I would, and I went with a very dear friend. And in the bulletin they needed volunteers for registration cards. And I had retired from a job, and I thought, well, hey, I don't want to sit home and just do nothing. I'll come. So I kept coming every Tuesday as a volunteer girl. And I didn't say anything. I kept listening to everybody else, and I never told anybody I wasn't a Christian because I thought they'd kick me out. And so then one Tuesday, there wasn't enough work to do with the registration cards, and I didn't feel like going home. And so they put me into collating. Now, this is really something into what we called study notes then, and into collating the work, and we had to walk around the tables, and we had to put each page into its proper order. And hey, I liked that. I thought, gee, that's all right. So I just kept coming back, and from there, from the collating, we got into making the study notes, and then I started stuffing the envelopes and mailing them out, and it just seemed like it started growing, and I enjoyed that, and I kept coming and coming. And then Norm Spear, God bless Norm Spear, he's the one that helped me through many trials, and he was praying for me. He knew my family. He knows my son's in-laws, and they had written to, and so does John as far as that goes, and they had written to pray for me that I would find my way to God. And their prayers. My son had a meeting. Oh, how will I say this, Ed? He had a business meeting down here, and he called me and he said, "Mom, I can't come home to visit you. Can you come down to the airport? I have 4 hours layaway." And I said, "Sure." So I went down to the airport and met him, and we had dinner, and he said, "Mom, have you ever considered receiving Christ as your Savior?" And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Well, he explained to me, and we sat there for 4 hours, and they were 4 of the most wonderful hours in the world. And he said, "Don't do this for me, Mom. You do it for yourself." So I went home that night, left him, went home that night, and I am a worrywart. I do not like airplanes, and knowing that my son is on business meetings many, many times, and he's always in a plane, and that frightens me. And I prayed to the God to protect him, bring him home safely. And the next thing I know, I just kept talking and talking to the Lord, and it just seemed like I was in a dark room, and all of a sudden a light came on. And I just felt great. I had always been a scaredy cat, a crybaby, a worrywart. Everything bothered me. And all of a sudden, it just seemed like he had lifted everything from my shoulders. I felt great. I felt wonderful. And then when I went to the church to do some of the work, the mailing and stuff, I don't know, everything just seemed just easy. Everybody just seemed so lovable and wonderful, concerned about me. I don't know whether it was just like day and night. One day it was this way, and the next day it was just beautiful.
From Florida, I went back to Moody Press, where I had worked prior to the time Darlene and I got married. And for the next year and a half, I was acquisitions editor there. And it was there that I met John MacArthur. In fact, it was the day I went back to Moody and interviewed for the job there that I first met John. I guess he liked me, I don't know why. But for the next year and a half, I worked on a couple of his books, The Family, The Ultimate Priority. And after that time, he asked me to come out here, which was a shock to me, because I was, that was my desire, but I'd never mentioned it to him. And of course, I said yes. I said yes right now. And he said, "Don't you want to pray about it or talk it over with your wife?" And I said, "No, we've already done that."
I really appreciate the caring atmosphere that the people have here. I was out of work for 4 days because I injured my back, and there were several people that came up to me and said, "You know, we missed you. We're glad to have you back, and how's your back doing?" And so I just really appreciate the fact that people are concerned about you on a more personal level at Word of Grace.
There isn't a day that goes by that I don't go home and think about the godly influence of the people here and how much I want my life to match theirs. I just want to say one more thing about what I like about Word of Grace, and that's my fiancée Maria. And tomorrow's November 23rd, and that's our 1-year anniversary. We started dating 1 year ago tomorrow.
Hi. What I like about Word of Grace communication is that God has given me an opportunity to make this place presentable. So when we have visitors, they're impressed because Word of Grace is doing their very best to make this place clean, orderly, and a happy place for a big family like us, the 62 employees that work here.
My name is Rose, and I like Word of Grace Ministry because it stands for the Word of God and gives out the message of salvation.
Well, I would just like to say to everyone who's at the banquet tonight that I've appreciated working here for the past almost 2 years. And I guess my greatest appreciation is that I can come to work every day wearing my cowboy clothes. That means a great deal to somebody like me. I want to thank John MacArthur for his ministry in my life and for the ministry that I've been able to share with him in this area of the Word of Grace ministry.
I want to thank George for being my chicken friend for 5 years. Bark, 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 something like that.
Yeah.
Or not. And I just am thankful for the time of growth and for God using this in a sense as a sort of classroom experience. And also my friend B, that the God has brought us together to work together now. I don't know what else to say.
To continue the growth of Word of Grace Communications, in 1980, we went from 125,000 cassettes sold in 1980 to 500,000 in 1981 and almost 1 million in 1982. And today, they have produced over 7 million cassettes that have gone across the world. We have radio programs in Canada, in the Philippines, in India.
My name is Carol Shoemaker, and I've been a volunteer at the tape ministry for the last 8 years and several months. And I would like for John MacArthur to know how very much I have appreciated the opportunity to do this service for the Lord. And this is a personal message for John MacArthur and his family to wish them a very blessed holiday season.
I'd like to say thank you to all the volunteers first, for without them, we wouldn't be a ministry today. I'd like to thank the employees of Word of Grace Communications. I'd like to thank all you people who have anything to do with our ministry, and of course especially to the listeners who have been so faithful in supporting John and the ministry to continue to enable it to grow into what it is today. We're looking for exciting things to happen in years to come.
I want to say something that I don't often get to express, and that's how grateful I am for our volunteers. I owe a lot to the volunteers because in the days when I was first associated with Grace to You, it was as a listener. And I subscribed to the study notes, even in the days when it didn't cost anything to subscribe to the study notes. And I was on the mailing list, I got the newsletter, and I realized and understood then that most of that was put together and assembled and mailed out, including the tapes were labeled and packed and sent by people who did it as volunteers. They got no pay for what they did, and they did it as unto the Lord because it was a labor of love. And I've always been appreciative of that. The role of the volunteers has changed over the years. I mentioned that in the early days when I was here, we even had volunteers do counseling. And there's just some logistical problems as the ministry changes shape and gets larger and we have to deal with more listeners on a timely basis. There are some things that volunteers used to do that are now being done by paid staff people. But I hope that none of that, I hope never changes the character of the ministry, which at its heart is basically a volunteer work. It's people doing their work as unto the Lord.
It's hard for me to understand why we pull away from each other so easily. before. Yet we build dividing walls between our brothers and ourselves. But I don't care what label you may wear. If you believe in Jesus, you belong with me. The bond we share is all I care to see, and we'll change the world forever. You will join with me. Join and sing, sing. You're my brother, you're my sister, so take me by the hand. Together we will work until He comes. And there's no foe that can defeat us. We're walking side by side. As long as there is love, we will stand. The day will come when we will be as one, and with a mighty voice together we will proclaim that Jesus is King. It will echo through the earth, it will shake the nations, and the world will see that you're my brother, you're my sister, so take me by the hand. Together we will work until He comes. There's no foe that can defeat us when
I don't know what to say. Yeah, the other night I went into the kitchen to make myself a snack. Mom has this habit of peeling all the labels off of all the jars and the cans. So it's, kind of hard to figure out what's in what. So when I went into the kitchen to make myself a snack, I ended up making myself a peanut butter and Vaseline sandwich.
I met a fella up at camp by the name of Mike. I met a guy. This is hard to do.
How bad do I look? Let me get out of the way. Let me look. Looks good.
Your chance to be a star.
You bet.
My name is Mark Hall. I started out in the editorial department back in the summer of '82, and we have a notice here. Would someone with this license plate number 3A7X21 PB378 LXOS 117870P please go out to the parking lot and remove your car? Your license plate is blocking the driveway.
Hi, I'm Steve, and this is my partner Chris. I'm a writer, he's an artist. We're here to introduce you to a revolutionary new soft drink. When you see a soft drink commercial these days on TV, what do you see? You see Max Headroom, you see Michael Jackson, you see people asking you, would you like to be a pepper? Well, we're here to introduce you to a soft drink made by Christians for Christians. If you're a Christian, you're a new creature in Christ, and that's why you want Word of Grace Soda Pop. It is truly the choice of a new generation.
Hi there, I'm Lance, I'm from the college. How do you like me so far?
The funniest thing about working at Word of Grace, well, I guess it's got to be Rick Drake, no question about it. The man is, what can I say? He's more than scared of his own shadow. He's scared of anybody's shadow. The first time I found that out, I was standing behind him in a hallway, and he was talking to Mark Hall. Well-lit hallway, turned around, saw me, and he let out this blood-curdling scream, sent me up, scared me so much I jumped 2 feet in the air. Yet the most incredible thing is his own wife scares him. He told me of a story when he first taught Sherry how to drive back in Ohio. It was when they were dating. They were out on a country road. It was dark at night, and he got out of the car. He told Sherry to get behind the wheel, and he walked towards the back of the car and was walking around the car to get into the passenger side. And all of a sudden, he met this person in the back behind the car, and he leaped, jumped 2 feet up in the air, screaming. And here it was his own wife, Sherry, who was walking behind the car to get in behind the driver's side. Lights went on all over the neighborhood.
I went to get a haircut. I came home, and Mom looked at me, and she went, humph. In other words, she was making some sort of comment on the way my haircut looked. And I said, what's wrong with it? And Mom says, well, it looks like you got a haircut. I said, well, of course I got a haircut. That's what I went to get a haircut for. What else would it look like? And Mom says, well, look at Kurt next door. He got a haircut and nobody knew. So I said, well, if nobody knew, how could you tell he got a haircut? And Mom said, I just know these things. So there's this problem that I got to go get a haircut, but I got to go to a barber who doesn't look like a barber. Boy, it's a tough crowd. Jeez. Good grief.